You showed your face here like you're one of us? My father's voice sliced through the noise of the dining hall, loud enough to silence clinking glasses and half-finished laughter. Every conversation at the grand family dinner fell off a cliff. I hadn't even taken off my coat yet. I stood near the doorway, fingers still curled around the handle of the gift bag I brought for him. Custom cufflinks, engraved with the initials JG. They were still in my hand. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. You weren't invited, Olivia, he continued coldly, rising from his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. His tone made the hairs on my arms stand up. This dinner is for family. The word landed like a slap all its own. I am family, I said, voice quiet but firm. He laughed. A bitter, breathless sound. You were once. Before you threw everything away. Before you shamed this name. I glanced around the table, at my stepmother, who was smirking behind her wine glass, at my cousins, who exchanged looks like they were witnessing a courtroom drama, at my aunt, who quickly looked down at her plate like she didn't know me. I didn't shame this family, I said slowly. I just didn't play your game. You married a soldier and ran off, Rachel snapped, pushing her chair back. No Ivy League degree. No corporate job. Just uniforms and government paychecks. You left this for that. My grip tightened on the gift bag. I shouldn't have come. I knew better. But a part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, they'd changed. That my father would look at me and still see his daughter, not a disappointment. You should have stayed gone, he said. Because walking in here tonight, uninvited, is just another embarrassment. Then, in a single, calculated move, he stepped around the table, walked up to me, and, before I could process anything, the sound echoed. A sharp, open-handed slap across my cheek. Gasps rippled through the room. The gift bag fell from my hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. I didn't cry. I didn't even touch my face. I just stared at him. And for the first time in my life, he looked afraid. Not because of what he did, because of what might come next. And then, like something from a movie, the front doors blew open with force. 3 men walked in, boots loud against marble. Tension sucked the air out of the room. Leading them, my husband, Mason, in full military uniform. Rigid.
Sharp. Calm.
He walked straight through the stunned silence, past the trembling butlers and the frozen guests, and stopped just a few feet from my father. He didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then he said in a low, even voice, "Touch her again and I'll show you what disgrace really looks like." No one breathed. The room stood still like a paused scene, every wine glass midair, every fork held inches from a plate. My father, James Grant Sr., took one slow step back, visibly rattled. The man who once commanded boardrooms and dinner tables like a king now stood blinking in the face of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to assert power. "You," he stammered, glancing at the 2 men behind Mason. "What is this? Some military intimidation stunt? You think this uniform scares me?" One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we're not here to threaten anyone. We're here to deliver something that should have been addressed months ago." He pulled out a small, navy blue envelope with an official federal seal. All eyes turned to it. Mason didn't even flinch. He just reached out, took it, and handed it to me. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, corporate records, and a printed notice from a federal investigations unit.
Fraud.
Tax evasion. Identity misuse. And every account connected to my name. I looked up, slowly, and said just 2 words. "You forged me." Rachel choked on her drink. Clara whispered something sharp to Emily, who stared like she'd seen a ghost. My father's lips curled into a sneer. "Don't be dramatic. You signed those forms years ago. You just don't remember."
"No," I said.
"I never signed anything. But I kept every message. Every vague email you sent, just needing my signature for something small. Every rushed phone call where you pressured me to help the family. You thought I was too naive to ask questions. I raised you, he snapped, red rising in his face. You raised your brand, I replied coldly. You raised a facade. And I was the perfect tool to tuck away your dirty money. Mason stepped in again, firm. Olivia was targeted because she was the only one without a criminal record. Clean credit, good public image, not tied to your corporate web. She was your scapegoat. And we have evidence. Rachel looked like she'd seen a ghost. This is a setup. You're just angry because he slapped you, and now you're turning this into... Into what? Mason asked. Justice. Uncle Derek finally stood up from the table. This is a family matter. Let's not escalate this into something it's not. But Mason looked directly at him and replied without blinking, a federal crime is something. The younger officer stepped forward now. This home is one of the 3 properties flagged in the investigation. Until this is resolved, it's no longer protected under corporate immunity. You may want to speak to your attorney if he still picks up. And that's when Rachel lost it. She rushed over to my father and whispered urgently, You said they had no case. You told me we were safe. James's face had gone pale. He didn't even respond. I stepped toward the table and gently picked up the gift bag I dropped earlier. The cufflinks inside hadn't even moved. I came here tonight to give you a chance, I said softly. To celebrate your birthday. To see if there was anything left between us. But all I found was the same cruelty I left behind. You think the world's going to care? He snapped, his voice rising in desperation. You think you're better than us now because you married a soldier and live in some apartment outside Fort Bragg? I think, I said calmly, I'm finally free of you. And then, in front of everyone, Mason reached out, took my hand, and gently kissed my bruised cheek. The gesture wasn't dramatic, it was grounding, real. It said everything without needing words. And I saw it then, in my father's eyes. Not guilt, not sorrow, but fear. Because for the first time in his life, he had no control over me. And I wasn't his little girl anymore. I was the woman who brought the truth into his house and walked out on her own terms. As Mason and I turned toward the exit, Rachel's voice shrieked from behind us. You can't walk out like this. You don't get to burn down this family and just leave. I stopped. Turned. Not because her voice mattered, but because I wanted her to remember my face.
Calm.
Unshaken.
Alive.
This family was already burning, I said evenly. You just didn't smell the smoke. The silence returned, colder than before. Uncle Derek suddenly stood. James, is any of this true? My father opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw tensed and twitched like he was chewing on nails. Jason, my cousin who always strutted like he ran the family business, laughed nervously. It's probably a misunderstanding. Some paperwork thing. These military types blow everything out of proportion. I'm sure there's no actual. There's enough, Mason interrupted. Enough to freeze assets, enough to flag 3 generations worth of transactions, enough to implicate everyone who knew. That landed. Hard. Even Rachel sat back down. You can't freeze the house, she hissed at my father. My name's on the deed. Not alone it isn't, I said, pulling out a second envelope. I had been quiet for years. I let them steamroll my voice, my choices, even my career path. But after Mason and I uncovered what my father did, using my clean identity to launder money through property trusts, I went back and dug everything. Turns out, my name was still listed on this house. Legally. From a trust my late mother had set up before she passed, one my father never thought I'd look into. So, technically, they were living in my home. The room spiraled into chaos. You're lying, Rachel muttered. She's bluffing, Jason scoffed. There's no way. Check the county records, I said, holding their gaze. They're public. Clara looked it up right there, phone trembling in her hand. Her eyes widened. It's true, she whispered. Olivia's the co-owner. My father's voice came low. Rough. You don't get to take this from me. I didn't, I said. You gave it away the day you forged my signature. Then Mason stepped beside me and added, and now the government's taking the rest. That's when it all broke. Jason stormed out. Rachel began shouting into her phone, already trying to reach her lawyer. Aunt Lauren cried quietly behind her napkin. And my father? He just sat, like a man realizing that for the first time, no amount of wealth, charm, or dominance could rescue him. I turned back to Mason. "I'm ready," I said quietly. He nodded. "We've got the car waiting." As we walked out the door, past the marble hallway where I used to play with wooden blocks as a girl, past the family portraits where my face was always slightly out of focus or cropped from the edge, I felt nothing. No ache. No nostalgia.
Just peace.
And then the final blow came, not from me, but from the young officer who had stayed behind. He turned back to the stunned room and said clearly, "An official freeze order is now in effect. This home is under federal review. We recommend you gather your belongings and vacate within 48 hours." And that was it. They all sat in silence as the door shut behind me. They had no idea I'd been planning this for months. They thought I was weak, forgotten, disposable. But the girl they mocked was gone. And the woman they tried to erase? She just took back everything. The rain had started to fall lightly by the time we reached the car. Mason opened the door for me without a word, and I slid into the passenger seat, exhaling the weight of an entire history I didn't ask to carry. When the door shut behind him and the car pulled off from that cursed mansion, it wasn't just a ride. It was release. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, eyes flicking between me and the road. I nodded. "I don't know if I'm okay, but I'm free." We drove in silence for a few minutes. The streetlights painted soft gold streaks on the windshield, and I finally let myself breathe. Slow, deep, trembling breaths. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've ruined everything. I hope you're proud. Rachel." I showed it to Mason. He didn't even glance down.
She's wrong.
"You didn't ruin anything. You uncovered it." I leaned back into the seat. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. But I guess the two were always tied together in their world. He reached over and laced his fingers with mine. "You didn't fight back because of ego. You fought back because you were done letting them rewrite your worth." That night, I slept without fear for the first time in years. The following morning, the media got hold of it. Not because I leaked anything, but because Rachel couldn't help herself. She tried to spin a story on social media, calling me an ungrateful daughter, accusing me of staging military theatrics to cause family embarrassment. She even posted a blurry photo of Mason in uniform as if she could discredit a decorated officer with hashtags. What she didn't expect: the documents. We had already handed everything to the legal team and forwarded it to a quiet investigative journalist we trusted, someone who had been circling my father's corrupt business practices for years, waiting for a lead. And now, they had won. The article dropped the next day. Front page. Digital and print. Title: "Betrayed by Blood: How a Family Patriarch Used His Daughter as a Financial Shield." Within hours, investors pulled out of my father's company. 3 board members resigned. His name was blacklisted from 2 real estate consortiums and 1 international business alliance. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth did the heavy lifting. It wasn't just financial. People started talking. Aunt Lauren messaged me an apology. Clara sent a voice note crying. Even Jason's fiancée reached out privately to thank me for speaking up. Turns out, she had been blackmailed into signing an NDA about some shady family dealings she witnessed at a charity auction. I didn't reply to any of them. Not out of bitterness, but because I wasn't interested in being a hero. I just wanted peace. 2 weeks later, Mason and I stood in front of the same mansion. Not as guests, but as co-owners. The legal review had cleared the way, and since I had proof of identity misuse and ownership, the house was officially mine. "I don't even want to live in it," I said quietly. "Too many memories." "Then let's sell it," Mason replied. "I don't want the money either." He smiled. "Then let's donate it." I turned to him. "To what?" He shrugged. "Something that matters. Somewhere girls like you can go when their families try to erase them." I stared at him for a long second before nodding. We turned the mansion into a recovery and mentorship center. For young women, for veterans' wives, for anyone who had ever been told, "You don't belong here." And every time someone walked through those tall front doors, I thought about the night I stood in that same entryway and watched them all laugh at my pain. Now, no one would ever walk through those doors and feel small again, because I had rewritten what that place stood for. Not legacy, not bloodlines, but truth. 6 months later, I stood on the marble staircase of the old Gran Estate, now renamed the Haven, watching sunlight pour through the same windows that once cast shadows over every dinner I was ignored at. But this time, the house echoed with laughter, real laughter, from women who were healing, from children who were learning, from veterans' wives who finally had a place to speak without being spoken over. There were no lies here anymore. No forks clinking over fake conversations. No family name heavy on anyone's chest like a curse. Just a space filled with warmth. And it was mine. I walked into the main room and paused. The original dining table, massive, gaudy, dark, was gone. In its place was a wide, circular table surrounded by mismatched chairs. One of the younger girls, Brielle, waved at me from the art station we'd set up. "Miss Olivia, come see what I made." I smiled. "Be right there." I caught my reflection in the grand mirror on the wall as I passed. I barely recognized her. She stood taller, firmer. Her eyes didn't dart anymore, waiting for judgment to fall. She knew who she was. That night, I sat with Mason on the balcony. We didn't speak for a long time. Just the two of us, coffee mugs in hand, staring out at the town we used to feel so small in. "Guess what?" he said softly. "Your father's trial date was set today." I looked at him. He didn't need to say more. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just nodded. Because justice doesn't always come wrapped in fire and revenge. Sometimes it's quieter, heavier, but it comes. "I never thought I'd make it this far," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not when I left this place the first time. Not when I was standing in that room with their laughter cutting me open. Not when he hit me, and no one stood up for me." Mason turned his body toward mine. "You did stand up." I looked at him. "No," he said again, firmer. "You stood up. You brought everything to light. You never raised your voice, but you exposed every lie. That's strength, Liv. That's the kind of woman they'll never be able to erase again." My eyes blurred a little, but I let them. Because now I cried when I chose to. 3 weeks later, I got a letter. From my grandmother's nurse. She'd passed away quietly in hospice, holding the handmade quilt I'd given her years ago. But attached to the letter was a folded note in Grandma's handwriting. "They made you feel like less so you'd never realize how powerful you are. But I've always known, Liv. And now they know too. Love, Grandma." I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my chest.
She had seen me.
Always. Even when no one else did. 1 year later, on the exact date of that family dinner, now a date of liberation, I hosted a fundraiser at the Haven. We raised $2.4 million for housing, education, and mental health support for women escaping abusive families and financial manipulation. The media called it a redemption arc. But they didn't get it. This wasn't redemption. It was reclamation.
I didn't want revenge.
I didn't want to take their crown. I just wanted to walk into a room and no longer feel small.
And now?
I didn't just walk in. I built the room myself. And every woman who stepped into it knew she was never leaving alone.